Hello and welcome to this very special event. My name is Ben and I work on The Week Junior, the magazine making sense of the world for 8 to 14-year-olds. We're very pleased to be working today with Inkspots to bring some of the best authors in the world right now into your home. And I'm in my home. In fact, I'm in my daughter's bedroom because it's a room that is pretty much devoted to books. I'm sure there are quite a few of you watching right now who have overflowing bookshelves too. Maybe you're told off quite frequently about the mess they make. I know that as a parent, I'm doing that as well. And no doubt you're pleased that the Week Juniors created a fantastic Summer of Reading challenge. And all you have to do to take part is read 3 books. To help you decide, our experts have put together a list of 50 suggestions. Give each of the 3 books that you read a rating out of 3 stars and sum up each book in just 3 words. Send your ratings and reviews to us at the Week Junior and you could win a £50 national book token or even a bundle of books worth more than £200. And you can find more at theweekjunior.co.uk/summer of reading. But don't go and do it just yet because we've got some fantastic people who want to talk to you first. They've all got brilliant books on our list of 50 suggestions. We have Jasbinder Bilan, author of Tamarind and the Starving Star. We've got Elle, McNicoll, who wrote A Kind of Spark. And we've got Benjamin Zephaniah, the man behind Windrush Child. So we're going to go in alphabetical order and we are going to start with Jasbinder Bilan. Jasbinder, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, really pleased to be here.
Brilliant. And we at the Week Junior love Tamarind and the Star of Ishtar. That's why it made it onto our list of 50 books to read this summer. What can you tell us about Tamarind and the Star of Ishtar?
Well, yes, so here is my book, Tamarind and the Star of Ishtar. It's about 11-year-old Tamarind who travels from Bristol to her grand ancestral home in the Himalaya for the very first time. And once she's there, she discovers a forbidden, secret, magical garden. She meets a mysterious mountain girl called Ishtar and her monkey Hanu, and she begins to uncover secrets surrounding her mother's death when Tamarind was a baby.
Now, your books have a lovely habit of putting magic and fantasy in the real world. Now, how do you how do you go about putting together the world of fantasy and the real world?
Well, it's an interesting concept. And when I was a little girl, when I was growing up, I grew up in the city in Nottingham, and I was always in my own imaginary world. And for me, like for a lot of children, there isn't a dividing line between kind of what's real and what's imaginary. And I kind of remember inventing for myself. I would kind of conjure up little people to entertain me, and they would appear on top of the wardrobe, and I could kind of just magic them up whenever I wanted them to appear there, and then tell them to go away. And so when I was writing Tamarind and the Star of Ishtar, I kind of drew on this idea that all around us, you know, magic is just a step away from reality. And that was something that I really remember growing up. And so it's a very fine line. And so that's the kind of vibe that I want to create in my books.
I love that idea of it being just a step away from reality. As long as you can imagine it, it can be real. And your books feel wonderfully real yet wonderfully magical. And at the Week Junior, we've been talking a lot about the idea of that reading is a superpower, and I love this. I love the idea of it's able to put me in parts of the world that I wouldn't easily be able to get to, or it allows me to go back in time. What are your thoughts on reading as a superpower?
Yeah, I think it's incredible, and I completely agree with you because you know, you have a book and it's actually quite a small thing. You know, it can fit in your pocket maybe if you've got quite big pockets. It can go into your school rucksack, but you just have to open the cover, and suddenly you're in this completely new world. Like here, you can go into the wilderness of the Himalaya. and you can go anywhere, anywhere, and it's all from the comfort of maybe your bed, or maybe people have other favorite reading spots. So it's something, you know, for something so small, it's something really mighty, and you're kind of going out and finding out new things. And you're also going into yourself, into your own imagination. And I think that's the really, really special thing about reading. It's what you bring to it, and it's as much about you as about the person that's written the book.
So I'm going to use my superpower now, and I'm going to go back in time. I'm going back in time to where you, Jasbinder, were in school.
Oh.
Let's say you were 10 years old. I want you to tell me what your favorite book was at that age, and what sort of stories you enjoyed writing at that age.
Mm. So, okay, so 10-year-old me is in her own world. She's in the classroom, but she's not really there. She's looking out of the window and making up stories. And I used to make up things all the time. And I kind of lived in this sort of imaginary world. And when I was growing up, the stories that I most loved were the magical ones. So I love things like The Hobbit, The Wolves of Willoughby Chase. I probably my kind of favorite was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And the reason why I kind of love these books is that it sort of presented magic in a way that was really accessible, and it was there for everybody. And growing up, I had a big Victorian wardrobe in my bedroom, and I used to go into it just like the children in kind of the Narnia stories do. And I was always looking for Narnia, this kind of magical world, and I sort of knew in the way that 10-year-olds, you know, all you 10-year-olds out there, 10, 11, 12 or whatever, you know that, you know, if you don't find Narnia that day, you're definitely going to find it the next. And I remember that so vividly, you know, believing in this magic.
That's wonderful. Um, so let's now skip forward. You're older. We've got a question from Hamish, who's 10. He asked, how did you become an author?
Ah, that's a really interesting question, Hamish. Thank you for that. Well, I think there are two things with that question. I think the first one is that I always saw myself as a writer, even before I could write properly. And so I remember when I was a little girl picking up a pencil and just squiggling and thinking that I was writing. All the kind of, you know, stories that were in my head were coming out in these squiggles. But it took me a long time to become a published author. I always wrote, but it was quite a long journey, and I'm a teacher as well, so I stopped teaching and I decided to think about my 10-year-old self, and what she really, really, really wanted more than anything in the whole world was to be a writer. And so I said, well, okay, Jasbinder, you wanted to be a writer and you write a lot, but you're not a published author. And so I gave a kind of gift to my 11-year-old self, and I went back to school. I went to university, and that's where I wrote my debut, which is Asher and the Spirit Bird. And it took a lot of hard work, and that book is inspired by my grandmother. And you know, when I was a little girl, she was a really important person to me, and she was the person that taught me not to give up. And when I was writing the book, I kind of felt that she was with me all the way. And I had a lot of setbacks, and just like Asher, I had to kind of pick myself up and keep going. And so finally, I had something that I felt was a story that I loved. And I entered it for the Times Chicken House competition, not thinking I would win. And I won it, and that's how my book was published. But it took a lot of hard work. And what I would say to all of you young people out there that want to be writers, it is hard, it takes a long time, and you will have setbacks, but you know, just keep going, because you will get there in the end.
And you're not the only person who loved Asher and the Spirit Bird. Obviously, it won the Costa Children's Book Award in 2019 and was a hit. and set you along this path to book stardom. Such a big enough star that you get to be here with us today. Um, what's the next book from Jasbinder Bilan? What should we be looking forward to?
Well, my next book comes out in September. It's called Artie and the Blue Gods. I don't have a copy to flash up, but it's got a really, really lovely cover. It's set on a wild Scottish island, and it's a story about a girl called Artie. And it's about sort of self-discovery, and it's a journey. It's also a magical story. And I was really kind of interested in mythology growing up as well. And in this book, I have looked to see, I was really intrigued to see whether there were any links between old ancient kind of Scottish Druid mythology and ancient Indian mythology. And I found connections. So this book is a kind of East-West magical Scottish island story.
Well, it's interesting. So you've gone to Scotland for this,
Yeah.
and the previous two, um, they took us to India, and a magical version of India. We've had a question from Rian asking about this kind of the culture you grew up in and inspiring these stories. How important was it for you to be able to tell stories that were inspired by India? Because I would imagine that when you were younger, there were not as many of the books on the shelves were set in India, and um, it's if you're a child growing up now, and you have Indian family, you've got a lot more to choose from to kind of celebrate your heritage. So was this a deliberate thing? I want there to be stories about India.
Yeah, sort of. I think it was subconscious as well. I think that when you're thinking of a story that you want to write, and I think probably when it's your first story, there were a few things that I knew that I definitely wanted for this story. I wanted it to be magical. I wanted it to be inspired by my family roots in India. And I wanted it to have a character who had a very strong bond with her grandmother. And I was born in close to the foothills of the Himalaya on a farm in a stable, which everyone thinks really funny. So I grew up in a big extended family until I was 18 months old. I grew up on a farm with a grumpy camel and a wild monkey who adopted our family called Omar. And, you know, we used to sort of do things like go into the farmyard and have a big sort of pan of popcorn and great kind of raw sugar cane on it, and make toffee popcorn and tell stories. So stories are really kind of very much part of my family and growing up. And then when we moved to the UK in the 60s, those kind of stories continued, and stories about Omar and you know, they're all like really, really happy times. And although I was a baby when I moved to Nottingham, I felt that these memories were my memories. And I mentioned my grandmother before, and she was a really, really important person to me. And she was the one that told the story. She was a storyteller in the family. So when I came to write the book, it was almost like the book was telling me that I was going to set this story in India, and it was going to be a celebration of all the things that I loved growing up. And as you say, when I was growing up, there were no books. I don't remember a single book that had a person like me in it. And also, interestingly, when I came to came to the MA and write, we did lots of little sort of practice pieces before you chose the one you were going to do. And I found it really hard to write stories that were about people like me, like someone like me. And my first stories had very sort of white names, and I don't, you know, I guess I did that because that for me was what a story was. But then when I looked into myself and thought about the big story that I was going to tell, it just that it was just a very, very straightforward, simple thing that I knew that it was going to be this book about someone like me. And so rather than it being something I had to think about, it really kind of came from the heart, and that's why the story is set in India and about somebody who I would imagine could have been me if my family hadn't moved to the UK. And as authors, when we're writing stories, we always ask the what if question. And so that was my what if, you know, what if this was my grandmother? What if that was me? What would be the worst thing that could happen in that setting? And what would the best thing be? And so Asher and the Spirit Bird has all of those things in it, has the worst things that could happen, has the best things that could happen.
That's fantastic, Jasbinder. Rian, I hope that answered your two questions about what inspired Jasbinder and how much her culture played a part in it. Jasbinder, thank you so much for your time. Your books are wonderful. I'm sure everyone watching this who hasn't picked up one of your books is going to be inspired to do so. Please do. She's a wonderful talent, and we can't wait. Can't wait for September and the next one. Thank you, Jasbinder.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Right. So one down, two to go. This is not over yet. There's still plenty more to come. And next, we're going to bring in Elle McNicoll. Elle, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing well. Morning, everyone. Well, afternoon now.
just about. So we have got your book, A Kind of Spark, on the list. What can you tell us about A Kind of Spark?
So Kind of Spark is about a girl called Addie who lives in a small village in Scotland, very small, about as small as you can get. And one day at school, a place where she does not find a lot of joy, she is learning about the witch trials that happened in Scotland hundreds of years ago. And her teacher is gratuitously talking about how many witches they managed to catch in her small village. And she's horrified and fascinated and thinks that it's a history that she can't quite wrap her head around, and so she starts campaigning for a memorial to be made in honor of the witches, and the town council or the village kind of council do not agree, and they think the past should be in the past, and it's the back and forth battle between her and their very small town ways.
And this book has been reasonably successful, hasn't it? It's you've won an award very, very recently because of this book.
Yeah, we just won the Washington's Children's Book Prize, which means a lot because it's voted for by booksellers, and we won the Blue Peter Book Award, which means just as much because it was voted for by young readers. So they voted for the book to win, and that's pretty great.
Well, I think part of the reason that readers and booksellers as well have taken to your books is because of the characters. So the main characters in your books, I'm thinking of Addie in A Kind of Spark, which is the one on the Summer of Reading list, and Cora in Show Us Who You Are. They're the sort of characters that our readers would love to meet and spend time with in real life. What advice would you give to the people watching today who would like to create such fascinating characters in their own writing? How do you make these characters so lifelike and interesting?
Well, I think that they come from a place of truth. I think that they behave truthfully in the imaginary kind of worlds that they live in, and I think Jasbinder touched on this a little bit, but I think it's very important to tap into parts of yourself that maybe traditional worlds of writing say don't do. That's not a hero. That person isn't the kind of hero that we see in books, and I think that's rubbish. I think that we need all kinds of people in stories, and Cora and Addie are both autistic. That's not a secret. They're both openly autistic, and the lens I use to write them both is my own, and I think that's what people respond to. I think they enjoy the authenticity of that, even though particularly my second book, but both books are very, fictional. They're completely made up. They're not my life, but the lens is quite true, and I think people respond well to that. I hope that's understandable. I don't know, that question threw me a little, but
absolutely. So going back to A Kind of Spark, and you say, you know, growing up in a tiny Scottish town and the witch trials. How much of that was inspired by local history that was around you, and how much of it was just pure imagination?
Yeah, I did grow up in Scotland, and Scotland has a very grisly history and a very dark history. And witch hunts are just one part of it, and that was the part that we learned about at school. And very much like the teacher in the book, actually, my teacher found it so interesting and exciting. And I remember being 9, 10 years old and just being horrified, just being really sort of shocked that was something that had happened. And I kept saying, but how did they know they were witches? And the teacher said, oh, they just did. And I said, but how? I don't understand the process here of working out that somebody was and the teacher was like, don't worry about it. And that's sort of what kind of Spark explores, is that horrible idea that someone can point their finger at you and say that you're a witch, and there's not much you can do. And I did research when I was starting to write the book about, I went back and researched the trials because I didn't trust this teacher to have given us the full story. And I was reading some of the notes about particular witches, for want of a better word, and a lot of the notes included, you know, things like, this person would talk to themselves, this person practiced a different religion, this person would talk to animals or was by themselves a lot. And I just thought, gosh, they're really vulnerable, a lot of these people. And I really heart went out to them all over again, just like it did at 9 years old. And that's what happens to Addie in A Kind of Spark. She's very empathetically linked to them. She relates to them. She knows what it's like to be an outsider and to be an outcast. And she sort of wants justice for them, because she feels she might have been one of them had she been born hundreds of years prior. And I get lots of mums and dads that are like, is this book very dark? Is this a scary book? I say, no, it's not. It's not. It, you know, witch trials are quite scary, but the book deals with it, I think, in a way that is not too scary. But yeah, it's all about these villagers that really don't want to acknowledge the darkness of their past in the community, and Addie's not having it. So
Well, good on Addie. Um, we've got some questions from people who are here. So Mila asks, what was your favorite book when you were young and why?
um this is a hard question to answer. I'm sure anyone that reads a lot knows, but the one that always comes back to me is probably Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. I remember being on the playground when that book was first published, and I was probably too young to read it at the time. I was probably about 8 or 9, and some of the older kids had found a copy and they were reading it at lunchtime, and they were all just, you know, they were so engaged by it, and there was some secret scene near the end that they were all excited about, which I had to read. I had to know what it was. So I got a copy, and I just couldn't believe how dynamic her writing was and how incredible that the story was. It's probably a little old for the people watching today. It's probably, I wouldn't advise reading it until you're maybe a little bit older, but I just loved it. I fell in love with it. So that's the one that stands out to me, is Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman.
Martha has asked, what inspired you to write stories?
Probably reading. And I'm not just saying that because of what we're talking about today, but I think when you read a lot, the next progression is to start writing. I think that's kind of, you know, just like if you love music, the next step is to start playing music. And that's what I did. And the first 20 years I probably wrote nothing that was worth reading, but that's okay. That's the point, is to practice. Writing is not something anyone is born able to do. It's something you learn. But it was definitely books. It was stories. I mean, I get in trouble when I go to schools sometimes because I tell children that film and television and audiobooks and graphic novels are just as good as actual books. When it comes to storytelling, you know, there's good and bad in all mediums. So if you like stories of any kind, no matter what, you know, books are preferable because of what we're talking about. But if you like stories, then storytelling is just the next step, I think.
So when you're telling a story, how difficult can that be? And I'm thinking of some questions that we've been asked today. We've had a couple. One, how do you start a book? And someone said, do you ever struggle to start a story? So can you tell us, when you're starting a new book, what's the process? Does an idea ping in your head and you start putting ideas down? Do you sometimes just start a story not knowing where it's going to end? What's your process?
I used to start stories not knowing where they're going to end, and that didn't work for me particularly. I now need to plan it out. So if I can get a 2-page synopsis written down, if I can get from A to B, then I know I can write the actual book. Starting books is not the hard part for me, it's finishing them. Finishing books is really difficult. Getting 30,000 words in and hitting that kind of sluggish middle point, that's the difficult part. And that's where the plan really helps. I'm a big fan of draft zero, which is a draft that is literally just you telling yourself the story, as Terry Pratchett used to say. You're just, it's not fit to be read by anyone. You're just telling yourself what the story is, and then you start making it better. It's a little bit like I don't know, draft zero is a bit like a chalk outline on the pavement, one of those like crime scene chalk outlines, and then draft one is the skeleton, like the bones go in. So there's a bit of structure, and then the next draft is, giving it a heart and giving it a spine and giving it a brain, and then you put the it sounds quite grotesque, but then you put the skin and the hair on, and then it's a full person, and you have a body by the end.
Elle, you sound like Dr. Frankenstein. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Bringing these stories to life with your imagination. Ivy has asked, if you were not a writer, what would you be?
I used to be a bookseller, so I'd probably go back to being a bookseller. I had a lot of jobs. I was a bartender. I was a cleaner. I've done all kinds of jobs. I quite liked being a cleaner. I might go back and do that. It's really good to be a cleaner if you want to write stories, because you overhear a lot of really interesting things. People don't think you're listening, and they don't really think that you're kind of invisible when you're a cleaner, I think. And a lot of my characters are people I used to clean for.
Oh, this is fascinating, Elle. Now I need I need to know a little bit more about this. So without getting anyone in trouble, anyone who's listening who wants to inspire books, you'd say that they need to be very much paying attention to the things going around them, listen to the conversations. Is there anything that you've ever overheard, and without giving too much away, that you've thought, that's so crazy, if I put it in a book, no one would believe me?
Gosh, I'm on the spot. I can't think of something crazy, but there's 2 characters in my second book, Show Us Who You Are. They're Adrian's parents, if anyone has read the book or will read it. They're a very well-to-do couple in Knightsbridge, and they used to come into a place of work. They're based on 2 people that used to come into my place of work when I was in hospitality, and a lot of the things they said ended up in the book, because they were I didn't know people like that existed, who were very, very posh, but just so angry, just so much anger just under the surface of all the smiling. And I found them so interesting, and so they ended up in the book. So that's a teaser if you want to read Show Us Who You Are. It's those 2. But yeah, no one's safe around me. I'm a magpie, but yeah, I can't think of an exact I don't ever want to don't ever want to put anyone's real personal life in a book, but just the facade they put on for the world.
Sure, I'm going to keep an eye out in your next book for a character based on me. And that brings us to the final question. This was from Poppy and Della. They've asked, what will your next book be about?
Oh, just like Jasbinder, my next one is back in my home country. It's set in Scotland, and I'm not allowed to talk about much, actually. But it's sort of magical realism, and it's got a third neurodivergent girl as the main character, because I think autistic children and neurodivergent children deserve to be in fantasy stories as much as they do contemporary stories. A Kind of Spark is a contemporary story, and it's great, and I'm so glad with how people have responded. But now I want to make sure that books are populated, the genre is populated with disabled children having adventures, and so that's all I can say. My publishers are quite strict.
That's fine, but Elle, please keep breaking down barriers. Please keep listening in on conversation and creating books that we know will live for a very long time, even after we're all gone. Elle, thank you so much for your time today, and good luck with that secretive sounding next
Thank
book.
you, everyone.
Bye. And finally, last but not least, we have Benjamin Zephaniah. Benjamin, how are you doing?
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm pleased to be here. I'm just from the gym, and yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to the people out there.
Well, good. Hopefully, this won't wear you out quite as much
I'm
as
fully
the
in the
gym.
gym.
I can imagine that you were working pretty hard. So, on our book list this summer, we have Windrush Child, and in Windrush Child, you've created a work of fiction based on the true stories of members of the Windrush generation. And the Windrush generation is the name given to migrants from the Caribbean who came to the UK to work after the Second World War, and some of them arrived on a ship called the Empire Windrush, hence the name. What more can you tell us about your book, Windrush Child?
Well, it's a story of a boy who's growing up in Jamaica, and he's happy in Jamaica. He thinks it's paradise because he can kind of go raise his hand and pick a mango, and he can pick apples, and he grows vegetables, and he just plays. And his father went a few years later. Sorry, I beg your pardon. His father went a few years before on the ship, the Empire Windrush, to England and was living in Manchester. And he thought that his father would return to Jamaica. And then one day he gets a letter saying and his mother as well gets a letter saying, come and join me in Manchester. He can't understand it because he thought dad was coming back to Jamaica. But anyway, he goes to Manchester, and he gets even more confused because he's told that he's going to England for a better life, and he's left his paradise with all his mangoes and his animals and his jungle to play in, and he's in a bedsit, and he can't understand why this is progress. And it's about him and the experiences he has, and sometimes the racism he suffers, and his mother, and the things they go through. And it's interesting, just earlier talking about knowing the end of the book or the beginning of the book. With this book, I mean, when I write, I tend not to know where it's going. I have a general idea, but but with this one, I knew the end, and the end is absolutely impossible to talk about because it's just you've read it obviously, so you cannot talk about the end without giving it away, and it's such a jar. But it's reality for a lot of people of the Windrush generation. See, a lot of people have to understand that when immigrants came here from Asia and Africa and the Caribbean in the 50s, 60s, 70s, um, it wasn't that they kind of, were running away from home, and I mean, some of them wanted a better life, but a lot of them were invited. They were encouraged to come because, you know, people didn't want to do the work Elle's done cleaning and stuff like that. People didn't want to do drive buses. So it's about this boy, and we grow up with him. We grow up with him right from the age of kind of 9, 10, 11 to 70 something.
Yeah,
I haven't read the book for a long time, and I haven't got a copy to show you actually.
Well, yeah, we can't talk about how it ends because that will spoil the story. But we should say it's although your boy in Windrush Child is fictional, his experience that he has at the end is something that what is happening is happened to a lot of people in the UK. So when you do read this book, this isn't just Benjamin thinking, oh, here's how the experience could have ended. It's how it did end for a lot of people. So it's a fantastic story, and I would heartily recommend it to everybody watching who hasn't read it. Now, I wanted to ask you, because I think it's so fascinating when history becomes fiction. So I want to know what tips you would give to those watching today who'd like to write stories based on real life history. What sort of research do you do, and what sort of things do you change to make it a work of fiction?
Well, you see, I was what a lot of people call a reluctant reader. I didn't read books when I was a kid. If one of the questions is going to be like, tell you what was your first book you read, there was no books in my house. This is a heavy thing to say probably this time of the day, but I remember once my dad caught me with a book and he slapped it out of my hand and told me to go and find something to do. I mean, there was no reading at all. It's not, my bedroom was not like your kid's bedroom at all, you know. And so when I actually started doing poetry, and it was spoken word poetry, you know, it's poetry for performance. And then I had a really great editor. I don't think writers talk enough about their editors, but you know, my editor, she's edited every Harry Potter book. She's edited some great books. She came along, she was editing my poetry when I was puffing books. And she came along and said, you know, write a novel. And the first thing I do when I write a novel, this is a little bit unconventional maybe, is I remember the 13, maybe 10, 11, 13, 14-year-old Benjamin Zephaniah, that reluctant reader. And I think, what would he have read? And then I write the story. I'm a professor at the university and we are obsessed with research, but so this may sound like a contradiction. I don't care about the research. I just get the story out. And then once I've written the story, I will go back and do the research to make sure everything's okay. And so for me, it's about telling a story that is, because everything I write is basically based on truth. I think one day I said something like, I like my fiction to be true. So it's based on experiences or people that I know. I just tell it as I think it is or should be. And then I go back and find out if this could really work. For example, when I wrote a book called Face, my first novel, there's a crash in there. 2 cars crash and there's an explosion. And I gave it to some friends who work in a fire station and they said, no, that happens in Hollywood. Cars don't blow up like that in real life. And then, so I changed it because I wanted it to be real. When I wrote Refugee Boy, I wanted the legal procedure to be real. So I wrote the story and then gave it to some refugee solicitors who specialize in refugees. So with Windrush Child, I told a story. And the great thing about this story that for research, I could go to my mother. You know, she wasn't on the Empire Windrush, but a ship just after that. And I could go to members of my family and just make sure everything was okay. So, and I also did, I mean, Windrush Child is my most researched book. So when the ship arrives in Southampton, I check what the weather was like for that day.
Oh, amazing.
You know, I mean, everything, the train timetable, when he gets on the train and he goes from Southampton to Manchester, I checked where he would have to change, how much the ticket would be and all that kind of stuff.
That's fantastic. And it's great that you're thinking of those reluctant readers, because I firmly believe that there's a book out there for everyone, that when they read it, it can be the thing that makes them want to read more. And I can imagine Windrush Child being that sort of book for people. I'm looking at the questions in the chat box. Ivy has asked, what was your hobby as a child? We know it wasn't reading. So what was your hobby?
Well, I did love kind of speaking poetry. I was always making up poems all the time. But my hobby when I was a kid is still my hobby now, actually. I'm Kung Fu crazy. I just do Kung Fu all the time, you know. I have a small gym and a big gym, and we have some friends here, so we've just been in the big gym all doing Kung Fu. And not because I like fighting, but because it's self-control and you learn how to breathe. And I love yoga as well. And then eating and kissing. Can I say that? Sorry.
No, that's fine. So my cousin was always into kung fu, and he said there's so much you learn doing kung fu about the world and the way that your mind works. So have you learned lessons from kung fu? I'm moving my hands here like I'm doing kung fu. I'm sure, Benjamin, this is not how you do kung fu. Are there things that you've learned doing kung fu that have helped you be a writer and a poet?
Oh, I thought you were going to say something else then.
Oh,
I guess the answer is probably no to that. I mean, it's taught me how to relax and how to be calm and all that kind of thing. But as a person, um, there's a school of kung fu which was started by a woman, and it's one of the most effective form of kung fu you can do. And she came up with a very small principle, and it really works. Normally, people see force and they meet it with force. We never meet force with force. It just creates more tension. And so that is a really interesting principle, because I think that's one of the problems with the world. People see something wrong. All right, I need more force. Then I'll need more force to counter your force. You know, if somebody's giving us force, we let their anger go. And there's a wonderful saying, I think it comes out of India, and I just love it. I've got it on my Twitter feed and other places. It says, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way.
Yes.
And if you can understand that, and I think that's wrong, what's wrong with a lot of, I don't want to get too political, but they think we got to do this, we got to get an army to get peace. Well, you get an army, somebody else will get an army. If you understand that peace is the way, then we can all live together in harmony and eat lots of cake.
Well, amen to that. I mean, there's certainly a message that comes across in your writing that conflict does not lead to good things. That working together, cooperation, leads to good things. Another question someone's asked: how long does it take you to write a book? So let's go with Windrush Child. How long did that take you from start to finish?
Windrush Child is the quickest book I ever wrote. I mean, it really surprised me, but I think it was because most of the research is my family, and a lot of it was me. There's quite a lot of me in there, although I wasn't born in Jamaica, I was born in Britain. So Windrush Child took me about 7 months to write during lockdown. Usually, I mean, I'm writing another novel. It's taken me about 5 years. And in between that, I wrote Windrush Child and another book. So, but yes, I think probably lockdown helped a bit. But it also helped that it was something that I knew very well. It was an area, if you like, a subject that I knew really well.
And something that was close to your heart, having what had been happening in real life at that time.
Yes.
I'm going to finish with one last question, and
no.
it's: what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given about writing?
The best piece of advice I've ever been given about writing. I've been given so many pieces of advice. I think when you start, I'm probably going to give you more than one, but when you start, I think it's always good to start with yourself. Jasbinder kind of referred to it, go into your own imagination, go into your own place or something you know very well. So I think a lot of writers say that, and the reason why we say that is because it's true. Write the book that you want to read. That's really important as well. If you're disabled or you come from a particular ethnic group that's not represented, if you feel there's a book out there that or something that people are not talking about, then you go and write it and talk about it. But you must enjoy writing. And when you finish something, you must feel good about it. I remember when I lived on my own and I used to do writing, and in the middle of the night I'd finish something and I just want to call my friends and tell them, and I used to get really upset because I didn't even have a cat I could talk to, but I really enjoyed the process. Even sometimes when I'm writing about things that are difficult, and I spent a lot of my life writing about things that are difficult, I still know when it's right, and I get a feeling that, yeah, this really speaks to me, and so it will speak to other people.
Well, Benjamin, that is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. Windrush Child is an unmissable read. If you've not picked it up, please do so. I want to give one last set of thanks to Jasbinder Bilan and Elle McNicoll. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to Inkspots for making this happen. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for reading, because I'm sure that everyone who's spoken today would accept that reading books is a fantastic thing and it makes the world a better place. So thank you for playing your part in that. Please take part in the Week Juniors Summer of Reading Challenge. It is super exciting. It is a way to travel around the world, go back in time, and do all sorts of amazing things this summer. Everything is just one turn of a page away. And on that note, thank you, goodbye, and hopefully we'll see you soon.